So many different ways. I know Jim does a lot of things with irrigation to fine-tune tannins in his vineyard. And I know that, you know, there's so many things. It's so important in the process on tannins too. You may or may not know that 75% of the tannins are actually in the seeds of the grapes. And so how you process the seeds, and how hard you squeeze, and all the, I mean, so many things go into it that really to sit there and say Red Mountain has harsh tannins, I think is really missing the whole idea. I think if unchecked or made by, you know, somebody that's a little bit newer to the field, I certainly believe, or if you bring it in too early and, you know, the tannins haven't developed at all in the grapes, I think that you certainly can create a wine that has harsh tannins out of Red Mountain. I don't think there's any question about that. But I also don't think that that has to be. And I think that as we get better and better with Red Mountain grapes, we're finding that we can actually make very polished, very ripe tannin, very, you know, very elegant wines.
Well, Randy Dunn knows a thing or two about tannins, makes a wine off Red Mountain called Feather, right? Feather? As part of the Long Shadows project. And he works with fruit on Howell Mountain. And when I spoke to him about the Red Mountain tannins, and said, boy, you know, you're known as a guy who will let tannins go where they're going to go. How do you tame the tannins on Red Mountain? He said, what tannins? So it's you know, if you have a firm hand.
We measured the tannins on our Grand Seal vineyard, you know, and they're right in the middle.
Well, Mike Januik has a reputation around the state as renowned as anybody's. If he wanted to walk into any vineyard in the state, I would imagine, and said, "I'd like some fruit to blend in with my Klipsun," there's not a vineyard manager or a vineyard owner who would turn him down. And yet, he has opted with this wine to go 100% single site. So let's taste number 4, and Mike, let's talk about the finished wine and why.
And the hardest thing, I think that a lot of times. When people start making wine in Washington, they look at how wine is made in other parts of the world, and don't give a lot of consideration to the unique fruit that we have. And I know that for the first couple of years that a lot of people ferment, they'll look at a place like Bordeaux and go, well, we need to macerate it for 4 weeks because that's how long we macerate in Bordeaux. And so I've encountered a lot of people whose first vintages tend to be pretty hard wines, and it's because they've adopted somebody else's practices with regard to maceration. But when we make this wine, usually isn't macerated for more than 7 days, and we taste the wine a number of times each day, and we pump our wines over. And we don't have a formula for how long we pump anything over. We go through every tank every time we do a pump over, and come up with a length of time after we taste each wine. And there are times during maceration that we'll pump it over a couple times a day, and then any given day we may say, let's cut it back to 1. And you know, we've been doing it for 7 minutes. Let's do it for 4 minutes today. And I mean, we will even taste a wine at the end of the day, and say, let's not wait till tomorrow to drain it off and press it off.
So the trick then to managing tannins is a firm hand and to be enable this.
Yeah, you've got to be tasting a lot. I think that you need to taste your macerations multiple number of times each day, and then when you press your fruit off, we only press to 0.4 bars, which you know is pretty low pressure, and our press cycles for our reds are usually 20 to 30 minutes. And even when we're pressing, we're out there in the pan the whole time tasting, and at a certain point, we say, okay, it's time to stop.
You know, I'm just tasting through this. I mean, I'm in love with this wine, and I think what I do love about it, one of the things that contributes to it is the firmness of it. And I I mean, to me, anybody who's drinking high-end California Merlot and gets a taste of this will never go back. Because there's a resonance here, there's a seriousness to this, which is almost old world. You know, it's the style's not old world, but the firmness and the seriousness is old world. Paul, when you take a, I mean, switch that around a little bit. Give me your thoughts of its in the context of it, this wine and its Washingtonness. And
Well,
its
yeah,
Klipsunness.
in terms of its Washingtonness, and many winemakers have told me, the standard practice in California, for example, as well as Bordeaux, is you blend Merlot in to soften the Cabernet. In Washington, you blend Cabernet in to somewhat add a vertical structure to the Merlot, but the Merlot on its own, it has such substance and depth, as you pointed out. Washington Merlot, and I've been tasting some of the pricier California Merlots lately, and even at the very pricey end of the spectrum, you know, wines costing 3 times what Mike is asking for this wine, they don't have that kind of grip. So the Washington part of your answer is the grip. The Klipsun part of the answer is what people have been saying. I think it's the quality of the tannins, the way they're managed, and that's where the winemaking really has a role. Winemakers are generally so modest, oh, it's all done in the vineyard. Well, it's not all done in the vineyard. A lot of it's done in the winery, and oftentimes screwed up in the winery. But when it's done right in the winery, then you get these beautiful, polished tannins.
And this is, Mike, this is 95.5 as well, or I mean, tasting this, I would have thought it was 15% Cabernet, maybe 20% Cabernet, for exactly the reason Paul's saying. There's a firmness to it that you're just not going to get in Merlot. I mean, I guess you'll get it in Pomerol, you know, and there's some Tuscan Merlots where you'll get it, but
We'll take Petrus as a.
That's not 3 times.
How many bottles of Januik Merlot could I buy for 1 bottle of Petrus?
And while we were talking about tannins, please, let's not, I don't want anybody to think that anybody on this panel thinks that any of these wines are overly tannic. The tannins managed beautifully. They're so well balanced. And even though they're big wines, there's big fruit, and there's big ripe tannin with a nice soft attack, and beautiful big oak, but it's really well balanced. So I think as time goes on, and they polish up even more, you're gonna have some just incredibly beautiful wines to drink like this, right?
And this is ready.
Yeah, this is.
Can we have this with lunch? I mean, this is.
You know, there's another point to make winemaking wise that I think is important. People always talk in places like in California about doing cold macerations and things like that. The problem that we have in Washington quite often is that our must is too cold when it comes. What I think is too cold is, especially if you're picking in October, and you've got 2 choices. You can inoculate it and let it sit there on its skins for a lot longer before the fermentation really becomes an active fermentation, or you can do what we do. We have all of our tanks set up so that we can either warm the must or cool the must. And we make a really conscious effort after day after the wine is inoculated to get the temperature up to a certain point, because we want our wines to get into an active fermentation earlier. We don't want it to. We don't want the wine to sit on its skins for a week or more before you really start seeing signs of fermentation. And I think for us that makes a big difference.
So I think it's been a swing